Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the wine we get to enjoy.
Okay. You want to go first, Steve?
Sure. I'm Steve Lagier, and this is our 2011 Lagier Meredith Syrah, and it comes from our property on Mount Veeder, and it's grown by our hands, and we make the wine, we grow the grapes, and nature puts the flavor in, and we just make sure it gets into the bottle.
Okay, as we say on our back label, pretty much expresses our philosophy. It says, we avoid meddling in the natural process through which the wine expresses the place. Our role is merely to safeguard the wine during its passage from vineyard to bottle and to protect it from too much winemaking. So it's not that Steve is our winemaker, and it's not that he's not capable of a lot of winemaking. He could do all kinds of stuff to wine, but we don't need to, and so he tends to keep hands off as much as possible. So what we put in the bottle is pretty much an expression of our place. I'm Carole Meredith, and I'm married to this sweet man. We've been together for a long time, and we live up on a mountaintop on Mount Veeder, and we're there all by ourselves. We're a mile and a half off the county road, and I was just telling Ian earlier that it's raining tonight here in Napa, and so we have a chainsaw in the back of our car because driving back up our long private road, you never know when a tree may have fallen down, and there ain't nobody there to take care of it except us. So
the county doesn't really care about trees coming down on our private drive, and it's not only a chainsaw, it's extra gas, oil, gloves, and ear protection.
And they have been used.
Yes.
And it always seems like when we've been out at night drinking, that's when we drive up the road and find a goddamn tree across the road.
Yeah.
Just when you want to go home and go to bed.
It's just what you want to do. A little chainsawing after a nice meal, several glasses of wine.
Very romantic.
Nonetheless,
yes.
We love the place, and we don't want to live anyplace else except up on our mountaintop.
It's worth the song. Oh, that's awesome. Well, as always, we've got a wonderful group behind us. So we've got an audience here, and they will be chiming in with questions. But we also have a bunch of you out there I know that have logged in that are going to be asking questions, and we welcome you at any time to chime in. You can do that on Facebook, you can do it on Twitter, and we will find out all of those things for you, and we'll answer as many questions as we have. And tell us a little bit more about this place you chainsaw your way up to when you have to.
Well, Carole and I met in Davis, and I was hired actually by Pat Mahaney over here at Robert Mondavi in 1985. And so we were presented with a dilemma of one of us was going to be working at Davis and one of us was going to be working up in Oakville. And so we needed to find a place to live. And we looked at a bunch of places halfway between, and they weren't very interesting. And we ended up looking at 70 properties here in Napa.
Wow.
And
we had enough money for land and crappy house, or a beautiful house and no land, and so we opted for the land and crappy house.
You can change houses. It's hard to change land. Actually, the place where we now reside and have for the last almost 28 years was about the 10th property we saw. It has a 1.5 mile long driveway that climbs 1,000 feet up the side of a ridge.
Wow.
And it was a dirt road. And
it was a Jeep track
it
at best.
It was a comical dirt road. And that's why we ended up looking at 60 more properties before we finally decided that the property really did represent a value, and someday maybe we could pave the driveway, which we now have. And that's how we ended up where we are.
It's 84 acres of mostly wild land. It's just a beautiful place. We only have about 4.5 acres of vineyard, and the rest of it is completely undeveloped. So it's just native forest. It's redwoods, Doug firs, oaks, bays, and lots of animals. I mean, you name the animal. We do not have wild pigs, thank goodness, and we do not have bears. But we have mountain lions, bobcats, foxes, raccoons. We have all kinds of stuff. Skunks, yeah. And we...
Nothing like having skunks mating at 2 a.m. in the morning. That's quite an experience.
Yeah, they're vocal. They're quite vocal.
I'm sure. Yeah. Speaking of vocal, I think the audience here would love some wine, yes? I heard some calls. Well, I'm going to place that over for you.
It's our 2011 Syrah, which is our current release, and I believe it's the 14th vintage that we've released. So. Our first release was the 1998 vintage. So we've got a bit of a track record now. We still feel like we're kind of new at it, but I guess not. We've been around for a while.
And it's got some great spice and really wonderful flavors. I'm enjoying it. And you two have a history that goes back pretty far as well. You're both at Davis. They're both scholars, and one of them actually happens to be in the Hall of Fame, and I'll let you speak to that. But tell us about how you two met. How did that happen? It was the school days.
Well, we met in 1980, and I really thought Steve was most obnoxious. And I had to sit next to him on a bus going on a viticulture field trip once, and I thought he was such a pain in the ass because he was just so loud and obnoxious and always joking. And at the time, I was married to somebody else. So
Carole had a starter husband.
I had a starter husband. But anyway, a couple of years later, I split from my husband, and I was working on a Saturday in my office at UC Davis, feeling really sorry for myself because I was all alone. And Steve walks down the hall, and I said, well, what are you doing working on a Saturday? And he was all tan, and he said, well, because I ski during the week. And so I just make up for it by, I work weekends, but I like to ski during the week when there's nobody else up there. And I said, oh, I used to ski, but, my starter husband didn't like to ski, so I never got to go skiing. So I said, geez, I really miss skiing. And he says, got to come along. I go all the time. So we started skiing together. And that's on his long rides on the chairlift. That's how we got to know each other. And that was 1983, I think. Yeah, 1983. So over 30 years. Yeah.
Back when it used to snow.
Right. Well, we got some rain. Hopefully we can hear it. Maybe that'll turn into some snow. And so,
I hope so.
So the place you were both in Davis, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
From which you were teaching, not studying. And if I'm not mistaken, you ended up in the Vintners Hall of Fame.
Vintners Hall of Fame. I was on the faculty at Davis in the viticulture and enology department as a professor. Steve was a full-time staff research associate. And also working on a graduate degree at the same time. And, we just used to cross paths all the time. We worked on the same floor, and Steve worked for a colleague of mine there. And I did a lot of work on grapevine genetics, also taught a lot of classes. And people always say to me, well, do you miss teaching? Because I retired from the university 10 years ago because I couldn't do both. I couldn't do our vineyard and wine, and we have no employees, so we're doing all the work ourselves.
Wow.
And commute to Davis and do a full-time job there. So I left in 2003. And people always say, well, don't you miss teaching? I said, no.
Or they say, how do you like retirement?
Well, that's a separate question. It's like retirement. I'll tell you when I retire. But they always ask me if I miss teaching, and I don't miss teaching at all. Because I was never there for the teaching, it was part of my job. But I did research, and that was really what I was there for, was to run a research program and discover interesting stuff about grapevines. So.
Interesting. Well, I know we've got a really specific question actually for you that's coming in here over video, so I'm going to cue that up. And while I do, why don't you pour that next wine for us?
Oh, okay. We're going to an old one now. Since our Syrah has a reputation for being really age-worthy. And so we have brought a 2002.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, 2002 Syrah, just so that you and everyone can get a sense for how this wine evolves.
Excellent. I'm lucky. You guys wish you were here. I'm telling you, you guys will get it in just one moment. But I'm sitting in the right seat here at ToutSuite. And also, make sure let's show them the bottle, because all of these images are images from the place that this wine comes from.
Yeah, they're all photographs of our place.
You can see that there. All right, we've got our question queued up. I'm going to launch that for you right now.
Christopher Lund, Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Meredith, done some amazing work with genetics over the years in the wine industry. My question is once a wine is blended and put in the bottle, is there an analysis that you can put the wine through that will actually chemically break down the actual blend that's in that bottle? Or once a wine is blended and bottled, it's indecipherable genetically or analysis-wise as to what the actual blend is?
Oh, that's a big question. Bear in mind that I'm not a wine chemist. I'm a grapevine geneticist. So, but all my work's been done with grapevine DNA, which is very variety specific, and some of that DNA does get into the wine for a short time. So if you have a very young wine, especially if it's an unfiltered wine, then it is possible to detect fragments of DNA in that wine that might be diagnostic for the variety or varieties that have been blended together to make that wine. But that doesn't last. If the wine's been filtered, it typically is gone. Even if the wine hasn't been filtered, it tends to settle out, so that wine that's been in the bottle for more than 6 months or a year typically has no detectable DNA left. So it's really not something you can do. But there are other chemical components that people who are wine chemists, unlike me, can use to try to learn something more about the wine. Usually it's not down to variety, but it often can tell you where the wine came from, like looking at some of the isotopes that might reflect the soil and the place that the grapes were grown in. And that has been used sometimes to try to prove or disprove claims of authenticity for a specific geographic area.
Wow. Well, there you go. I would say that's a detailed answer to a detailed question, but you nailed it, whether that's your specialty or not. And
I've had some practice answering
So
questions.
that question's come up before.
Yeah, that's I get a lot of the same questions.
so let's talk to a winemaker, Steve, then. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the difference between this and what we were drinking before?
Well, this is our 2002, so many vintages ago. And Carole and I, we did one smart thing when we started to make commercial wine. We tried to always set aside enough wine that we could then review it years later. And 2002, I would say, was a typical year for us, about the middle of the road in terms of heat. And early on, this wine didn't have, it seemed to close down for a couple of years, but now it has
It went
really,
to sleep. We thought it was dead.
yeah, well,
I did. I thought it was dead.
well, it's resurrected, and now it has beautiful spice, and there's olives, and I think it's a great expression of the terroir that we have at our place.
Why don't you tell them what it is about our place that you think is great?
Well, there's a couple components of Mount Veeder and specifically our ridgetop. First, being on the ridgetop, where the soils are fairly thin, and that really, Syrah tends to be a fairly vigorous variety, and I liken it to a galloping horse in terms of its growth potential. If you have deep alluvial soils like down in the valley floor, you can have enormous crop potential and growth. You can grow a huge crop of leaves, and the problem with that is it doesn't make very interesting wines. It makes a lot of wine, but not very interesting flavors.
Okay.
So having the restrictive soil on the ridgetop is number one, to kind of hold back the amount of fruit that we have just naturally without us doing a lot of intervention. And number two, our proximity to the bay. Mount Veeder is the closest mountain growing region in Napa to the bay.
We can actually see the bay.
Yeah, we see San Pablo Bay from our house. And
feel that cold air every summer afternoon.
Every summer afternoon you get the cold air. And since we're up at about 1,400 feet, we never get as high a daytime high as the valley floor, and our nighttime lows are higher.
In the summer.
So we have a moderated temperature regime, and being our proximity to the bay, we're fairly cool. And when you're growing Syrah in a cooler environment, you tend to get that spicy and floral and slightly earthy character that you wouldn't otherwise get on the valley floor necessarily, especially if you're getting 7 tons an acre and then you're just kind of diluting out and you get kind of red wine.
So we get half the fruit and twice the flavor.
Yeah. So
it is extremely flavorful.
Yeah.
This wine is still so much alive. It's just vivacious.
Yeah, and even our oldest commercial vintage is 1998, and I would still say it's a relatively young wine. It still has lots of fruit character and spice, and it's taking on some complexity, but I wouldn't say it's not getting to that cedary old red wine stage.
Not at all.
Not even close to that.
No, it's
and people often ask us, how long will this wine age? Well, I don't know.
How long will it last?
We don't know. All we can say is from our experience, the wine seems fairly young even after 15 years.
Right. It really does. There's so much life in this. And I guess in the end, doesn't a lot of that kind of come down to personal preference? Some people really like a younger flavored wine.
Yes,
you need to bear in mind that 99% of wine is consumed within the first year it's put on the shelf. I mean, so it's very odd for people to have a 2002 wine. It's really kind of extraordinary. So now, amongst people who are very interested in wine, obviously those percentages aren't that high. But anyway,
we often get asked, when should I drink this? People who buy our wine.
I'd say as soon as it's within reach.
Yeah, which that one is.
And they say, well, should I drink it? Or should I wait 5 years or 10 years? And I say, I don't know you. I don't know how you like your wine. Do you like young red wines? Drink it now. You like old red wines? Wait 10 years. Better yet, buy a case and open a bottle.
Yeah, I always recommend you buy a case.
Yes. That way you can try it throughout.
That's right, and you can do the experiment yourself.
Yeah, you can answer your own question.
Yeah, 12 years from now, you tell us which one you like.
And then when you ask us again, we'll repeat what you've told us.
Yeah, do another experiment. Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah. All right, well, I guess I'm drinking a little more quickly than you are.
Well, we're talking. Yeah.
So I hate to.
Well, you shouldn't have to. I wonder. I bet we could find you another glass if you don't.
Yeah, that's okay. So our third wine is our Mongoose, and everyone asks, "What is Mongoose?" And I'm going to let Carole talk about what Mongoose is.
Well, yeah, a lot of people we interact with are real wine geeks. A lot of people we interact with are real wine geeks, and even many of them have not heard of Mongoose. They don't want to say that. That would be revealing that they're ignorant. So what they say is, well, I'm not very familiar with Mongoose. Now, where is that from again? They never did know. So Mongoose is a variety that's grown in the Savoie region of France, which is in the foothills of the Alps. And if you were to look at a map of France, and if you know the northern Rhone, which of course for us is Mecca, then if you go due east from the northern Rhone, you get into the Savoie region. And of the red grapes they grow there, they grow Pinot, Gamay, and Mongoose. But the wines that they make there, the red wines, are very light-bodied wines. They're very aromatic, but they tend to be light-colored and light-bodied. And in the course of my research, we learned that Mongoose is actually a close genetic relative of Syrah. I mean, very close. It's either Syrah's uncle or grandfather. We used to say it was Syrah's crazy uncle, but now it might be Syrah's crazy grandfather or grandmother, or who knows. Anyway, they're relatives. But when you have the Mongoose from France and Syrah from the northern Rhone, they don't have much in common. So the question we asked is, well, is that because the varieties are just very different despite being closely related? Or is it because they're being grown in different places, on different soils, with different farming, with different rootstocks, with different winemaking, different traditions? All those variables. How about if we plant Mongoose next to Syrah on our site and we keep everything the same site, same farming, same winemaking, same rootstock? Then if we taste similarities or differences between the wines, then the only variable that's really separating these wines is the grape variety. So right. That'll be a very kind of instructive experiment. So we did it kind of as an experiment, and we've been really pleased, and we're really glad that we did it because we love the wine for itself, and we do get the
it's also it's been very surprising because we tasted several Mongooses. They're not easy to find from Bougie or the Savoie, and as Carole said, they're a bit light-bodied, light color density or medium color density, similar flavors to Northern Rhones. And then when we finally made Mongoose, we thought, well, we must not have Mongoose because this is so different than. And that speaks to the difference between Napa Valley and the Savoie. I mean, we can get much riper fruit here in Napa than you can in the Savoie.
Very cool
and in fact,
region.
who our wine went. Somebody took some of our Mongoose over there, and some critic over there thought it couldn't be Mongoose. Or
I don't know.
we heard something to that effect, and Carole knows this. The plant material for this block came from 2 vines in the variety collection that Carole DNA fingerprinted. So we know
right.
they are Mongoose, and so it is Mongoose. It's just a different expression of Mongoose here because it's a different terroir.
Although, so this is our 3rd vintage of our Mongoose, and the 2009, 2010 were really dark, inky, concentrated, rich wines, more so than our Syrah, which is saying something. But then come 2011, which was such a cool year for Napa, and we find that this 2011 Mondeuse is much closer to the French versions, do you think?
Well, it's certainly moving in that direction.
So it shows the effect of the
2011 was a very European-type vintage here.
A challenging year,
Yeah.
as critics say.
I mean, our yields were restricted, things were cooler and wet, and we were pleased that we got sound fruit, not as much as we wanted, but we ended up making sound wines. It was really heartbreaking to throw as much fruit on the ground as we did.
And Steve and I do this vineyard work ourselves, so we're out there
snip
clipping
every last.
That's $1. That's $1. But you have to do it.
You really try not to think of that too much.
You have to drop the bad fruit.
Go crazy.
If you didn't do that, then the wine would suffer greatly, and so you have to do it.
The wine would have really sucked if we hadn't put half of the fruit on the ground.
You'd have a ton of crap as opposed to a little bit of
half a ton of good wine.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
we have a question.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Yeah, come on over.
Come over.
Thanks. So what I wanted to ask about is when you're dropping fruit, over how long a period were you snipping at the Mongoose during the growing season?
Well, Mongoose is kind of a special case because Mongoose produces a lot of fruit. So we already, even in a good year, we're dropping a lot of the fruit because it produces 2 or 3 times more than we think the vine should have. So we'd already done that through the growing season. And then when we got rain right before harvest, then we went out again. So the last fruit was dropped right before harvest.
Yeah.
So this took
so that it wouldn't rot.
over a couple of months that you were dropping.
Oh yeah, we start with the Mongoose specifically. We flower cluster thin that before you even have bloom.
And that's to prevent rot? Or
no, it is.
No, that's to control the amount of crop.
Yeah.
You need it to be in balance.
I tell people we actually gave some budwood to a couple of growers despite our warning them about Mondoose's.
They wanted to grow it.
Well, I've never seen a variety that has 4 flower clusters on a shoot, and Mongoose does. Not every shoot. But I'd never even seen I'd never seen a Syrah shoot with 4 clusters. Mongoose, if it's a strong shoot, it'll have 4 clusters.
So you have to cut that back.
We just start by taking clip off that basal flower cluster. I just pinch it off when we're going through and doing the initial shoot thinning. I just pinch it off immediately because I know I've still got 3 more clusters, and I'm going to get rid of 2 of those later.
Right. And this is spread out on trellises? Or?
Oh, it's on everything's
wires,
vertical shoot
wires.
positioning.
Yeah. So the idea with wine grapes is that you need to keep the vegetative part of the vine, the shoots and leaves, in balance with the amount of fruit. You don't want to have too much fruit. You don't want to have too little fruit. You want to have just right fruit. It's a Goldilocks thing. So that means that if you have a variety that tends to produce just the right amount of fruit, like most of our Syrah, that's great. You don't have to do much. You just have to keep your eye on it. But the Mongoose tends to produce much too much fruit, and it doesn't have a lot of leaves and shoots, so it can't carry that much and still produce good fruit. So we have to cut it off.
Is it more prodigious in producing fruit than your Zinfandel?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, by a mile.
Absolutely. More than anything we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And you never, in Savoie, they don't have this problem.
Because I think that there are much cooler growing conditions. They may even have more depleted soils than we have. And so they're just a different situation. It's not, from what you read in that new clone book, it's not known to be a heavy producer.
No, not at all.
But that's more about the region that it's grown than its genetic material.
You're not growing it on the edges.
Right.
No, we're growing it. It loves our place. It just loves our place. Yeah.
Thanks so kindly.
That was a good question. Actually, we've got another question I see from one of our viewers. You guys ready for another one?
Sure.
I think this one is actually about your love affair while at school. And just sure is that maybe not. Maybe not. Let's check this out.
Hi, Carole and Steve. This is Austin Beeman, and I have a question for you on ToutSuite. You've been in the wine business for quite a number of years, and I'd like you to speak a little bit about how the wine business in California has changed over the course of your lifetime, and where you think it's going in the future. Thank you very much. I appreciate hearing your answer. Goodbye.
That's not a broad question, is it?
No. Whoa. Hey, don't ask us again.
Hello. Very pushy, isn't he? Excuse me. Apologize on his behalf.
So I'm really happy to hear from Austin. Austin runs a wine shop in Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
And he's been to visit us here in Napa. He's a big fan of our wines. He's also very much a geek, and he loves Mongoose. And he really wants to carry Mongoose in Ohio, but I think he's probably the only wine shop manager in Ohio who wants Mongoose.
I bet he can hand sell it like crazy.
Well, he could, yes, but then you have to go through a fair bit of regulatory hassle to put a new wine into a state, and it's not worth it.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah. So, you want to take a crack at Austin's question?
Well, I mean, practically everything, other than we're still making wine.
Repeat the question.
Well, the question is what's changed in the wine industry, and what hasn't changed is we're still making wine. I think the business model and the opportunities for small wineries have exploded, and it's unimaginable to do a project like what Carole and I have done
at our small scale.
At our small scale. Had we started this in the 60s, I don't know how we could have reached customers directly as we do now. The internet's changed everything, and it's odd that we can be so small and yet Constellation brands can't compete with us because they don't have what's unique about Lagier Meredith. So we have something special, and we can't compete with them. I mean, we can't compete with them on price, and we don't need to. It's almost like we're making different products. It's amazing.
I'd like to think we are.
Well, we are.
Yeah, I think the internet changed it all. When we entered the business, which was, we sold our first bottle of wine in 2000, and that's when the internet was just beginning to play a role in wine sales, most particularly direct-to-consumer wine sales. And I remember when we first started, we got a website right away, but there was no e-commerce. So I made an order form and put it on our website, and people could download it and fax it in. And that's how it worked, but it worked.
Woo, high tech.
Right.
And so the other thing that was emerging was online wine forums. So this became kind of a way now for the individual consumer to share his or her opinions about wines with other wine consumers, not having to hear it all just from critics or merchants or people with a vested interest, but from other consumers. And so people started talking to each other on Wine Lovers Discussion Group, West Coast Wine Net, what used to be called the Mark Squires Bulletin Board, which became erobertparker.com, and then later on wineberserkers.com, with all these people telling each other what they drank last night and whether they liked it or not, and saying how to get it. Here's the website. And so pretty soon, people like us, very small producers, and we produce less than 1,000 cases, pretty soon people realized they could come directly to us. And we learned how to ship wine, and we can't ship wine everywhere, but boy, it sure has changed. And since in the last 10 years, wine shipping direct to consumer has just ballooned, and it is now possible to ship to most states in the country. There are some obstacles. A lot of states require monthly reports. I'm the one who does those.
Bless you.
And tax filing. Sometimes it's not easy, but it's possible. And that can be said about a lot of things. It's not easy, but it's possible. So you do it if you can. So I think things like that have really changed the business. We couldn't have done it 20 years earlier than we did. And what about the future? What do you see?
I see in our immediate future, I see potentially.
Yes, I see it potentially a Malbec.
And now for something completely different.
There's a crystal ball for you.
So we started growing a small amount of Malbec a couple of years ago, and this is actually our first release of Malbec.
Ooh. Just a small amount. Would we make 40 cases? 30 cases?
It was a barrel and a half.
Yeah, it wasn't much.
And for comparison, so a larger winery, a larger winery could make, 50, 100,000 cases?
Oh, a million?
A million cases.
Oh, easy, yeah. There's some biggies that make a million cases. Pat,
a million cases.
A million cases a year is pretty common. I mean, not common, but there's lots of wineries that do that, yes. Easily, yeah.
Easily doable.
And you're doing how many of this?
Less than 1,000.
You just have to have
less than 1,000 cases, and they're doing millions of cases. And specifically of the Malbec, you're making how many cases?
Oh, it was only about 40 cases.
40 cases.
Very, very tiny.
Cases.
We don't have a big place, and since we do almost all the vineyard work ourselves, we don't have employees or consultants.
We do hire a crew to pick.
We hire a crew to pick. But we have to stay small just so that we can do the work. And not only do we not want to hire people for economic reasons, but also we both kind of like to be in control. And I think having to explain to somebody else what we want done in our vineyard and why, that would be so hard. I'd rather just do it.
Right,
I'd just rather do it myself. Yeah.
Wow, that is a big boy. It's tasty, though.
So Malbec, several of our neighbors on Mount Veeder have started producing Malbec.
And we were impressed with their wines.
Yeah, Cuvée makes good Malbec. Hess Collection makes a good Malbec. So we thought, well, Mount Veeder, maybe this is a good place for Malbec. So
seems to be.
we
Wow.
started.
Tell us a little bit about Malbec. Like, what are some of the characteristics, and maybe something you might pair this with if you were cooking up?
Food.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good thing to pair it with. Maybe
we're not super restrictive on wine food pairings. I think that there's a lot more flexibility than people and critics would point out that. Anyway, that there's not that. I think this would be great with grilled meats.
On the back of our rosé label, we say, serve this wine with anything you want. And that's pretty much our,
Yeah, we didn't bring a rosé, but we do make a rosé because Carole wanted a summer wine.
We're good at making
paired with summertime, I guess.
Yeah.
But this is a fairly big wine, and you should have it with fairly big food.
Sure.
Lots of it.
Yeah.
Or maybe if the food doesn't taste
And
very good,
Malbec, especially young Malbec, tends to be kind of grapey. It does have a different characteristic than a lot of other varieties.
That's okay, go ahead.
We were getting a little too cozy.
We do.
Yeah, we were getting. Hello.
NSA, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
You have the loud voice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Who's the Secretary of Homeland Security now? That's who we should be talking about.
It used to be Janet Napolitano. Now she's pretending to be at UC. Yeah, well, I think it's all a ruse, though.
Yeah.
She's still there. Anyway. We're getting sidetracked.
Oh, conspiracy theories.
What about the future of the wine business? Where do you think it's going?
Oh, I think that it's all going to be shut down within 5 years.
I would like to see.
By now, it's over. This is apocalyptic.
That's right.
Well, I see the diminishing strength of the three-tier system. I don't think distributors are going to go away, but I think that their ability to control the wine business in the U.S. is getting smaller because consumers can buy wine directly from so many producers. And because so many states are opening up and making it easier for producers to ship to consumers, I think that distributors are just going to have to settle back and just accept kind of a shared role and no longer a dominant role. And that goes for lobbying too, because the alcoholic beverage regulations in this country have for so long been heavily, heavily influenced by wine distributors. And I see that diminishing. It's not going away. They've got a lot of money, but I think given some time, I think we'll see that
I think also
diminishing.
it's the greatest time ever to be a wine consumer. There are so many great wines. I think generally wine quality is better than it's ever been, mostly due to better educated winemakers and knowledge of technology. And there's so many choices and so many interesting wines that are being made now. I don't see that trend reversing. I think that you're going to see Mongoose. You're going to see lots of interesting wines, and there are thousands of varieties. It's odd that we, in the wine business, we focus down on just a narrow few varieties: Cab, Chardonnay, blah blah blah. There are so many other flavors available out there, and then taking all those different varieties and growing them in different places, and so much diversity of flavors are available. And I think that going forward, we're going to see a lot more of that.
That's an exciting thing. I mean, even just sitting here tonight trying these different things,
Yeah.
It really is a wonderful time. And sitting at this table, it's fantastic. And by the way, you are at ToutSuite. We've got 2 more wines and not that much more time. So
Yeah, let's move right along.
yeah, let's move on to the
we
next
saved
one.
the most interesting for last.
Oh yeah.
Interesting for us anyway. What we have here is our Tribbett Drag. And what Tribbett Drag is Zinfandel,
Okay.
going by a fancy old name. And
It smells so good.
Tribbett Drag is the ancient medieval name for Zinfandel. And we are growing this kind of as a tie-in to my research, because one of the last things that I worked on at the University of California was trying to find the European home of Zinfandel. Because all the other major grapes, Chardonnay, we look to Burgundy. Sangiovese, we look to Tuscany. Cabernet, we look to Bordeaux. Zinfandel, where do we look to? Nobody knew where to look. And so for a long time, people thought that maybe it was an American variety. But anyone who knows anything botanically about grapes can just look at a Zinfandel vine and know that it's not an American grape. It's a European grape. We just don't know where. So there had long been some speculation that it might have come from Central Europe. But then in the 70s, it was discovered that Primitivo in southern Italy was the same grape as Zinfandel. And there was no question about it. It was the same grape. But the Italians were the first to say, but it's not our grape. It didn't come from here. It's a fairly recent immigrant to here, too. So when I came along and started working with DNA methods that would enable you to conclusively say whether something was the same as something else, we started looking for the European home of Zinfandel, because it certainly wouldn't be going by that name. So what that means is that then if we found a candidate grape that kind of looked like Zinfandel in some other place, the only way we could really prove whether it was Zinfandel or not would be to compare the DNA.
Right.
And so we knew that Primitivo in southern Italy was the same as Zinfandel. But where did that come from? Well, all you've got to do is look at a map of Italy and the Adriatic Sea and the Dalmatian coast of what is today Croatia. It used to be Yugoslavia. And that's a very narrow body of water. Boats have been traversing it for thousands of years. So it was kind of a no-brainer to go look in Croatia for the home of Zinfandel. Serendipitously, there were some grapevine geneticists in Croatia who were looking to me for some help because they wanted to learn more about their varieties. They'd never heard of Zinfandel, but they contacted me and said, "Can you help us with your DNA stuff?" And I said, "Well, I can help you, but you can help me find Zinfandel." And they said, "What's Zinfandel?" So I explained, it's a very important variety to us, and we think it came from there, so let's work together. So we did, and it took us 3 years, but we found Zinfandel in Croatia, and we found it in several places in Croatia, going by several weird names. none of which was Zinfandel. But then ultimately, by involving a historian, my Croatian colleagues were able to trace it back to the 13th century.
Wow.
And it turns out that Zinfandel, going by the name Tribbett Drag, was one of the most important wine grapes in the whole Adriatic wine trade. And this was big-time wine trade, you know, going to Venice and all these city-states on the Italian peninsula. And it went by name, which is really unusual. Back in the Middle Ages, you didn't call wines by their grape name. Anyway, so kind of as an homage to the venerable history of Zinfandel, which, of course, knowing that it was important in the 1300s, makes it centuries older than Cabernet Sauvignon. So take that,
Wow.
Cabernet Sauvignon, you know?
Wow.
So Zinfandel is an ancient grape, and it really deserves perhaps a little bit more respect. Maybe more winemakers should give it some of the attention that they give to some of the other varieties. So we decided to call it Tribbett Drag to just point out that this is an ancient grape. And also, of course, there's a little tie-in to my own personal history with the grape. So we call ours Zinfandel Tribbett Drag.
Well, it's wonderful, and we've got only a little bit of time left, so in one more wine. So I would like to give this more time, as you're suggesting. And for those of you who aren't that good with geography, Croatia is a small town in Arizona. very, very
Well
near.
known for its wine.
Yes, well, and sand.
Yeah.
No, far away from there. She was clear on the Adriatic Sea, which is in Georgia.
And it's beautiful. If you ever want a Mediterranean vacation for half the price, go to the Dalmatian coast of Croatia. It's all about red wine, fresh fish, blue water, good coffee, pizza. It's fantastic.
Sounds just like Arizona to me. No, I'm just
So the last wine. Yeah.
No, please tell us about the last.
Well, the last wine, the 2011 Tribbett Drag that you had is long sold out because we didn't make much. But we're going to be releasing our 2012 Tribbett Drag in about a month and a half, I think. Something like that, about a month and a half. So we thought we'd just bring along a little barrel sample and so you could all taste it. Kind of whet your appetites for what's to come.
Fun. See, if all of you out there, you got to come to ToutSuite to try this kind of stuff, or at least come to Napa Valley and meet the right people, and they just might let you try some of it out of the tasting bottle. It's a beautiful thing. Well, we're closing in on the end of the night, but we'll talk a little bit about this before we do. What do you expect the differences to be between this and what we just tasted?
Well, 2012 was a very different year. Steve can speak to that.
It's much warmer, much easier year to grow grapes in Napa. 2012 and 13 were a piece of cake compared to 2011. I've been making wine since the early 80s, and there's only really been two challenging vintages in my mind since that time, and it was 1989 and 2011. 2012, much warmer, easy to grow, much more fruit, a little higher alcohol, a little more concentration. The Zin from our property, our Tribbett Drag, has a lot of the characteristics you get from Zinfandel, the brambly fruit and the pepper. But there's also another spice that I've never tasted in another Zinfandel. And the wine seems to have what I think is a cinnamon type character.
Yeah.
Other people say allspice, and
No, they say Chinese five spice, which I don't
five
know.
spice. Anyway, I'm not sure what
That smells like.
I can get 4 of the 5 spices.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but it is unique, and I've not tasted it, and it's in the 2012 as well as the 2011. It's nothing that I did. It's just, again, an expression of our place. Nature decided our place was going to have this flavor. I'm just glad it comes through.
We just try not to get in the way of what the site gives us.
Well, you're lucky to have such a good site.
Sounds trite, but in our case, it's really true. It's such a distinctive place, and it gives us such wonderful flavors. So we're just pleased that we decided to buy it, crappy house and all.
And staying out of the way sometimes can be the hardest
It can be
thing.
hard. It can be hard, yeah.
Well,
And I think that if you are a farmer as well as a winemaker, it's easier to stay out of the way because you can put your effort into the vineyard and appreciate what you're doing there.
Question, if money was an object, where would you put it? Vineyards or...
We would build a winery on our
I'd buy
property.
a couple more Porsches.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Couple more, nice.
we want to build a winery on our property,
Okay.
and we got a use permit from Napa County 10 years ago,
All right.
and we've just been saving money ever since. And it's just
We
out of
saved-
reach. It keeps moving
We saved
out
what
of
we
reach.
thought was an enormous pile of money, but then you talk to a contractor and you realize your pile
It's not
is
enough.
much
It's not
smaller
enough.
than what it needs to be.
So no question about it. That's where it would
Yeah,
go.
no wonder.
Because
Yeah.
right now we haul all our grapes down to the Napa Valley floor and make the wine.
Where
And
you
we-
make the wine?
We make it at Monticello on Big
Oh,
Beach
okay.
Road.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Which, that's a nice place. We get along well with them. But we'd much rather have the winemaking on our property where, we can go top a barrel and then go back and have a cup of coffee and not have to put stuff in the
Yeah.
car, drive all the way down to the valley floor and turn a half-hour job into half a
Hauling
day.
4 tons of grapes down our driveway is a little nerve-wracking.
Sure.
It is.
Everything.
Especially with the rain.
Oh, you should see them. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, you're at ToutSuite, and we're going to end tonight by putting this bottle in front of you, and this is your chance to do a quick 15-second commercial. Tell us about the wine and the place. For the people who just signed on, sign us off. Tell us about the wine and the place.
We're Lagier and Meredith. We have owned this property for 28 years. We didn't know what kind of wine it would produce for us when we bought the property, so it was really a kind of a leap of faith, and our faith has been repaid in many, many ways, and we just couldn't be more happy with the kind of wine that we get off this fantastic place.
Well, thank you so much for sharing it. It's wonderful, and it's been a pleasure talking with you guys. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to the crowd, and thank you for joining us on ToutSuite. My name is Ian White. You're at ToutSuite, and this has been a wonderful evening. Cheers.